Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Life and Books and Everything. This is Kevin DeYoung, and I'm glad to be joined with my special guest, Dr. Thomas S. Kidd. Tommy, I'll turn it over to him in just a moment. But I do want to thank all of our listeners who have followed with LBE throughout this season. And we're going to take a break over the summer. So I think this is the last podcast for a little bit, but the timing is good here because we're going to talk about Tommy's book on Thomas Jefferson right as we come into the 4th of July weekend. But I'm grateful for Crossway sponsorship throughout this season and also Westminster Books at various points. And be looking forward, Lord willing, to be back at the end of the summer or beginning of the fall with a new season of guests, and we'll have some time to have Colin and Justin back on as well. So for this last episode, last not least, Tommy, thank you for being here, and just tell us a little bit about yourself, about your education background, your faith, and about the move that you and your family just made, and then we'll jump into the book.
Sure. Well, I grew up in South Carolina and went to Clemson University. Mostly that was just because I liked Clemson football.
Yeah.
But I had my best friend in high school was a believer, and he was sharing the gospel with me, and he got involved with the Navigators at Clemson, and that's how I became a Christian. Is he led me through an evangelistic study. So I became a Christian my freshman year at Clemson, and over time, both got more intellectually engaged as a person and as a believer, and got interested in doing graduate work in history. And so I ended up going to Notre Dame for a PhD and working with George Marsden, who some listeners may know his biography of Jonathan Edwards, and other work in American religious history. So I got a job at Baylor in 2002 and had been there for 20 years. But over time, I had started working as a visiting professor at Midwestern Baptist Seminary in Kansas City, and got sort of a taste for that, and so we have just moved full time to Midwestern, and as I'm talking to you now, have just moved to Kansas City. So with all the associated chaos with that, but it's really an exciting time, and Midwestern is just growing like crazy. And it's an exciting opportunity for me to work directly with pastors, which I really didn't get to do at Baylor since I was in a history department. And so we're just so excited for this new chapter the Lord's taken us into.
And how much will your work be similar, and how much is going to be different? Because you're still a historian, you're doing that, but very different schools with different aims and different people that are coming. How much overlap, and how much is this going to be a different kind of work for you, Tommy?
Yeah, I'm hopeful that I'll be writing at the same pace. I always have, and Midwestern's been very generous about the structure of the position that they want me to keep writing. So that hopefully will be the same. The classes and students that I'm teaching will be different to a significant extent. I mean, one is that because Midwestern is a seminary, I'm not going to be, we have an undergraduate college, but I'm going to be teaching almost exclusively in the seminary. And so, whereas at Baylor, at least half of my teaching responsibility was with undergrads, here it's going to be with seminarians doing MDivs and PhDs and that sort of thing. And these people are wanting to be pastors or already are pastors for the most part, where at Baylor, I was, especially in the history graduate program, I was training people to teach in history departments, normally in Christian context. So that's where the shift is going to be. But I'm excited about, in some ways, I'll actually be able to teach a little more in my area of specialty because I'm teaching seminarians. So in the fall, for instance, I'm teaching a class on the first and second Great Awakenings, which is a class that I
Great.
never taught at Baylor. So
Yeah.
and it's right in my wheelhouse as far as my expertise. So I'm excited about that part, and in some ways I'll be able to be even more focused here than I have been before.
It's great. And how does your family feel about it? Your wife, kids?
Yeah, I mean, my wife is a middle school science teacher, so she's employable wherever she goes.
Yeah.
But for my kids, it's definitely a transition time. My older son is going to Dallas Baptist University in the fall, so he was going to be transitioning
Okay.
out of the house anyway. And then my younger son is going into his senior year in high school, so he's going to do that here. And so that's a challenging transition for him, but it's what he wanted to do. I actually offered to commute for a year so he could finish out, but we decided that we were all going to move together, and that
Oh,
certainly made it more convenient for me and my wife.
good. We'll get right into the book, but I want to hear a little bit about your writing process. I think if I remember these anecdotes correctly, different people and different writing professions or even creative professions have different ways of doing things, and some people are wait till inspiration hits them or go for seasons without doing something and then they're all in. And then but I think I remember hearing uh, Paul Simon, the singer songwriter, just make a point every day to try to write some sort of music or some sort of verses, whether it comes to anything. I think Jerry Seinfeld said that about just writing some jokes each day. Now you're not writing jokes or music, but you're writing history, and you have a good reputation of being very diligent and disciplined. I forget if it's 1,500 words or what exactly your word limit is each day, but you really set out each working day to get something done, and little by little, those add up to really a very prolific writing career already. So, say a little bit about how you go about the discipline of writing, and it's not just opinion pieces. These are really well researched scholarly sorts of books. How do you do that?
Right. Yeah. I am known for that. And I talk about that a lot in my newsletter, which, if people are interested, they can find a subscription link in my Twitter at Thomas S.
Mm,
Kidd. But yeah, I'm known for 1,000 words a day. And I mean, there are writers who do more than 1,000. The Princeton historian Anthony Grafton, I think, does 2,500, which seems kind of extreme to me.
yeah.
But 1,000, and the number doesn't really matter that much. I mean, you might be in a career situation where 250 is more reasonable, but for me, 1,000 I think helps to keep me on pace for various writing projects that I'm committed to at any given time. And so, and I'm definitely of the Paul Simon school of, that it's better to just go ahead and write some every day rather than waiting for
Yeah.
inspiration. Because I just don't, I normally just don't, especially when I start writing in the morning. I usually don't feel inspired. In fact, I usually feel, so the pull of procrastination and
Yeah.
struggle to get going. And so if I just know that that's normal, and I'm going to write some that day and hold myself to a rough standard about what a productive day looks like. Yeah, when I'm in the writing process, that's pretty standard work day for me. And yeah, I mean, I even as with the move to Kansas City, I kind of had in the back of my mind that I needed to get back to that discipline as soon as I could. And so the past couple working days, I've written 1,000 words, and that really helps me to feel like I'm, in the the writing life is sort of solitary and can be kind of hard to
Mhm.
know whether you're being productive or not. And so having that word count really helps me with that.
Yeah, well, you've been very prolific in writing really good stuff and a number of biographies already. And this one just came out with Yale, Thomas Jefferson, a biography of spirit and flesh. I just finished this last night, and thank you for it. So right off the bat, why another biography of Thomas Jefferson? I mean, there may not be as many things as, say, Martin Luther or Abraham Lincoln, but there must be pretty close to the number of things that have already been written about Thomas Jefferson. So what is your angle here? What is your overarching thesis? What are you trying to tell us about Thomas Jefferson? Obviously, some things that scholars would have, traversed many times, but you're trying to say something unique or new or in a different way, or you wouldn't have written the book. So why another book on Thomas Jefferson, and what are you trying to communicate through this biography?
Right. There are many, many books on kind of every conceivable topic about Jefferson. And what this is not is a blow by blow political
Right.
biography, which there are some very fine examples of that. And those are worthwhile for sure, because Jefferson had such a long, in many ways, successful political career. But what I'm trying to do in this book is to answer the what I think is probably the most pressing question about Jefferson, which is kind of the how could he question, and
Hmm.
that's in our culture right now, in light of all the the racial tension that we have, and grappling with our national history with regard to slavery and so forth. There's a lot of people when they think about Thomas Jefferson that they think how could he say all men are created equal in the Declaration, and yet not only own hundreds of people as slaves, but we're almost certain that he carried on a long-standing sexual
Hmm.
relationship with one of his slaves, Sally Hemmings. And so how could he do that? And that is part of the ethical conundrum of Thomas Jefferson. He's an enigmatic figure in terms of religion, his ethical commitments, and then the way that he actually lived. And so I'm trying to probe beyond just the what comes so easily, which is just say, well, he's a hypocrite. And that probably is fair to a certain extent, but it's not a very historical answer.
Right.
Um, it tends to be the way we act now on social media and so forth. Is just if there's someone with problems in the past, which I think to some extent is everybody who's ever lived, except for a certain carpenter's son from Nazareth.
Yeah, right.
Uh, well, if we can identify problems that are particularly aggravating from a modern perspective, we just say, well, they were a hypocrite or a sinner, and therefore we cancel them. And I certainly think that Jefferson did things that were morally atrocious, but I also think that we can just sit with the ambivalence and the enigmatic character of Jefferson and think about what he actually believed, what his kind of ethical, philosophical, religious system was, and then how that matched up with how he actually lived. And I
Hmm.
think just sitting with those tensions and paradoxes is a worthwhile historical project, and so that's basically what I'm trying to do in this book.
So I think I remember reading Gordon Woods say, the famous historian, say something like, ever since Jefferson's death, and even while he was still alive, in some ways, the whole American experiment has been interpreted on the back of Thomas Jefferson for good or for ill. So as Jefferson goes, so goes America. Or as we're looking at America, so we go back and look at Jefferson. So
Right.
if we want to say America is this great land of liberty and equality. We go to Jefferson's view on rights and what he did in the state of Virginia, and of course, most famously in the Declaration. If we want to say that America from the very beginning was not just hypocritical, but was built on the literal backs of enslaved persons, sexual predators would be a contemporary phrase. You go back and you make that case with Jefferson. Or you can say Jefferson was the great hero of the agrarian farmer, and he was the one who had unbounding enthusiasm in the common man. I think in one of, again, Gordon Wood's chapters, he looking at the founders, he ends by just highlighting Jefferson's great confidence, which came to be really rocked at the end of his life as he grew more aware of how this American experiment he helped to launch was not going the way he had thought it would. And yet Wood ends by saying, because he had this unending confidence in the American people, we remember him and not James Madison. Well, I remember James Madison. I like James Madison. So I haven't forgotten him, but I understand the broader point that Madison had a little bit more of a realistic sense of who we are. So your book is really helpful in that you are presenting a picture of Jefferson, warts and all. Nobody's going to read this book and say, "Oh wow, I didn't." Tommy's presenting a Jefferson who is just this great hero. No, you actually come away seeing really up close and personal, not just on the race issue or slave issue, but as a Christian, we'd say his various trysts, or at least seem to be liaisons with different women. So my question, Tommy, is you worked on this probably over the course of years. You already knew a lot about Jefferson. You've written in this area many times, but having written the book, did you come away from this with more of an appreciation for Jefferson or more disappointed in Jefferson?
I think more disappointed. I knew about the slavery part, of course. It's hard to escape that as a professional historian. I knew about his sort of exotic religious views and a little bit about the Jefferson Bible, which is his kind of condensation of the Gospels into mostly a naturalistic kind of ethical treatise of Jesus's teachings. But one of the things I didn't quite realize was what a disaster he was in terms of his personal finances.
Yeah. Can you say more about that? Because I wanted to. That comes through really clearly in the biography, and isn't the sort of thing that's going to be on a plaque at Mount Rushmore, and yet dominated his life in a lot of ways. So you just keep going about his, mountains of indebtedness.
Yeah. Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, a lot of the people, especially in the South, the planters and aristocrats in the South of Jefferson's generation, they tended to be in debt, and sometimes they managed that well, and sometimes didn't, and Jefferson didn't. And yes, it was a shadow over his personal life. He lamented it. He inherited a lot of debt from his father-in-law. He inherited slaves and land and debt, and that proved very difficult for him to ever get out from under. And part of the reason for that is that Jefferson, I think, was really a compulsive spender, and he had things that he wanted to buy and to build that he just never seemed to have considered the option that maybe he didn't need to do it.
Yeah.
And that was particularly the case, I think, with his hosting and entertaining responsibilities, which were very significant as a diplomat in Paris. I think this is where it probably really started, as getting a taste for Parisian culture and wine. And then as president, of course, the president in those days had to pay out of pocket for household expenses. And he spent like nobody's business. There were years where he spent more at the president's mansion in D.C. He spent more on just wine than on paying his household staff.
Yeah.
He
He liked his fine wine.
He sure did, and he at one point actually told his French wine agent that price is no object, just get me the best vintage.
Yeah.
And I think that
They
his wine
did
agent
it.
was quite happy to
Yeah.
comply with that request. And it comes to Monticello. I mean, when there were two different versions of Monticello in Charlottesville. His mansion there, he built one relatively modest version, then immediately tore it down and started on a much more lavish second version. And when he was done with the second version, then he started on another mansion in near Lynchburg at Poplar Forest in Virginia. And you just think, why do you keep doing this when you are also constantly talking about how much you hate being in debt? And some of the entertaining in politics is understandable, but a lot of it is just because he had this kind of idealized view of what his private world should be like, and he was just bound and determined to manifest that.
Yeah, it's hard for, at least I find it hard to, well, there's a number of aspects of Jefferson that are hard to grasp and reconcile. I'll say more about that. But this is another one of those. And you're right, this was not uncommon among genteel Southerners. Washington had it to some extent, but didn't finish in as such dire straits as Jefferson did. It reminds me of that old, I don't know if you ever saw that old SNL sketch. It has Steve Martin, and somebody is doing a little infomercial on this little book about debt, and it's just one page, and it says, "Don't buy things you can't afford." What? How does that work? Well, you sort of want to give Jefferson that book, but he had such a vision for this enlightened. He was cosmopolitan and yet agrarian, and he liked the hustle and bustle of the city. But of course, Monticello was his lifelong project. Why do you think for him and for that sort of planter class, because he ended, you said, what was it, $2.5 million in our terms in debt?
Yes.
$100,000. And then, so it's a lot of money. Was it just his own sense of what the sort of person he thought he was meant to be that led him to this? You would think there must be people around him and the people to whom he was in arrears who just said, okay, you got a big, wonderful house. Stop with all of the wine and the exotic plants. And why did it never occur to him to just, okay, trim back, read your books, and stop living a life that you can't afford?
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure, but I do think that part of it is what he thought the way he thought he had to live, and he had to entertain and host as a Virginia gentleman, and also as an exemplar of the Enlightenment. And so when, for instance, when he was in bad shape in the 18 teens, 10 years before his death. But then what really sealed his fate was that he co-signed a loan with a relative in the late 18 teens, and then that person almost immediately died. And then the nation entered the Panic of 1819, which was an economic depression at the time. And so Jefferson called that his coup de grace. And at that point, there was no way he was ever going to get anywhere close to being solvent. So he in that case, I think you see there's some bad luck. That's definitely part of the story. But anybody with any financial sense would have recommended to him, do not co-sign this huge loan with this person. But he felt obligated, I think, as a gentleman, and to return favors and to be seen as being generous and not to think about money in a kind of grubby way. And so I just don't know if he really thought not co-signing that loan was an option, and it just totally sealed his fate. And I think in that, I mean, that's probably the number one moment that was so disastrous for him. But it also, I think, is representative of his whole life, that there were a lot of expenses and financial commitments that he made that he just didn't seem to feel like he had any option to do otherwise.
Yeah, I think you noted it was $20,000, so that's a fifth of his at death indebtedness. So that was no small thing. You mentioned this earlier, Tommy, and historians often write about people in the past and mention their inconsistencies and their clay feet, and that's true, and that's going to be true of everyone. It does seem with Jefferson that the seeming, at least, inconsistencies or paradoxes get cranked up to 11, as Spinal Tap would say.
Right.
So you have this, that he was, really adamant that the nation live within its financial means, but he didn't. You can find throughout his political career statements on slavery that are very commendable, wanting it, recognizing it as an evil, wanting to see the slave trade end, private assurances to many people along the way that this was a bad thing. And yet that didn't translate into his personal life. You can look at the way you point out, he was almost invariably magnanimous in public and knew how to say the right things. And we can, and that's good. It's good it's better to have, your public figures be magnanimous in public, even if they're not so in private. But you said his, animosity towards some of the other founders even was as intense as anyone in that generation. And he had a particular loathing for Patrick Henry, about whom you've also written a biography. So you can just go, all across the spectrum with Jefferson. And we haven't even gotten to religion, which I want to make sure we spend some considerable time on. But how do you explain, how do these things hold together? Or as a biographer, do you throw up your hands and say, I just don't know, but that's the Jefferson we have to us in the historical record, and we just have to deal with him? How do you make sense of what are really some pretty monumental different kinds of Jeffersons?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a challenge that we're really wrestling with in our cultural moment. Is, how do you still appreciate good things about someone like Jefferson when there's such manifest appalling behavior, and I think one of the ways that I think through this issue as a historian is thinking about what was realistic at the time. I mean, you don't want to go in the direction of sort of moral relativism, but you look at somebody, for instance, a couple of other people that I've spent a good time researching and writing about is Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield, evangelical leaders in the mid 1700s, and both slave owners. And so Christians have really struggled to know what to do with them. And, for both, it was wrong for them to be involved with slavery, and they should have known better. But Whitefield's sin in that matter, I think, is much more grievous. I mean, in the sense that Whitefield is a pro-slavery activist, where Edwards, I think, is just sort of, he's owns a few slaves, writes very little about it, certainly doesn't do anything politically about it the way that Whitefield does. But both of them have almost no one in their lives who is saying to them, don't you know that slavery is wrong? I mean, it's just so baked into Anglo-American culture at the time that they just don't have many people around them. I mean, John Wesley comes out later against
Right.
slavery. John Newton comes out later against slavery, but Edwards and Whitefield are both dead by that time. So some of it has to do with the context. And in Jefferson's case, he not only said that he knew slavery was wrong, but he did have people throughout his life, including a couple of people he was, relatively close to,
Like the
who,
Adams.
yeah, like the Adams, who knew that slavery was wrong, and even in a few cases, he had Virginians who were pressing him to follow their example. These are people who came to believe, usually as Christians, that slavery was wrong, and so they were emancipating their own slaves and either moving with them or helping them to get out of the state, which was legally required. If you were going to emancipate your slaves, and they were pleading with Jefferson to set an example and do the same thing. And going back to the financial, I mean, this was something that Jefferson could just, even if he was so inclined, he was such a disaster financially that there was no way he was going to think about freeing his own slaves, because, Jefferson was quite candid. They're his capital, right? I mean, if he's ever going to make money, the money is going to be coming from slave-grown agricultural products. So, Jefferson is confronted with this issue. And then, it's also not entirely uncommon for slave masters to have sexual relationships with their enslaved women in particular. In fact, we are pretty well certain that Sally Hemmings is Martha Jefferson's half-sister, Jefferson's wife's half-sister, because they have the same father, the slave master, who's Martha Jefferson's and Sally Hemings' father. And so, it's a known practice to be having a sexual relationship with enslaved women. But it is still, you talk about that it gets amplified with Jefferson. I mean, there are patterns of behavior that I think warrant the kind of amplification of our moral indignation about the way that he actually lived, especially in light of his stated belief on the issue of slavery in particular, that it was wrong in both Christian categories and the categories of the more secular Enlightenment.
And so just stay here for a bit, because this is you say this is the central question in his moral universe, or at least our interpretation of it. And perhaps the most famous or infamous relationship, or at least relationship question in the history of America, is Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And you said, she is the offspring of the same father as Jefferson's deceased wife, and then the mother there, I think you said, was herself a mixed race slave, and then Hemings. I mean, at one point you say later in life, she was recorded as a free white woman. So there were obviously within her own lineage had been several of these slave master and slave relationships, which of course we're right to decry. Do we have any sense, and I think the answer is we just don't know for sure, but do we have any sense of what a relationship between Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings was like? Any sense? I think you said at the end that she almost certainly was there attending to him at the end of his life, which suggests, however things started out, not excusing that at all, but perhaps there was a genuine tenderness or affection between them. How do we make sense, and what do you think, as someone who looked into the sources, try to understand what was the nature of their relationship?
Yeah, I think it's important on the Hemings-Jefferson relationship to kind of just draw a line at a certain point of saying we don't know. There's I think, like everything else in American culture, it tends to go to extremes of, in some movie or artistic representations of the relationship, there has been this kind of interest in representing it as there's some kind of romance or love or
Right.
something like that there. And then the other extreme is people who insist that you have to call it rape.
It's just lifelong predation and nothing
Yeah,
else.
and here I'm really just following Annette Gordon-Reed, who is the most influential scholar of that relationship, and she's a historian at Harvard, and there's a just kind of an opaque nature to their relationship, because of course Hemmings doesn't leave written accounts of her life or the relationship, and Jefferson doesn't either. So everything that we say about it is circumstantial and inferential. I mean, it is undoubtedly coercive. I mean, because slavery is coercive. So if she's owned by him, then there is an irreducible level at which this is a coercive relationship, where Jefferson wields the power. I think the most intriguing aspect that could introduce a very limited, contextualized sort of what would we say an agency for Sally Hemings is that, according to one of her sons, who talked openly in the mid 1800s about how Thomas Jefferson was his father. He said that when they were getting ready to leave Paris, because we think that the relationship started when she was a teenager in Paris, and the 30-year or so age difference between them also feeds into the coercive nature of the relationship, but that slavery was not legal in France, and so she could have pursued a case for her freedom. Now, I mean, she's a teenager and a slave, so she has limited resources to do this. But the son suggested that she made him, Thomas Jefferson, promise that if she went back to Virginia with him, that he would agree to free any children that they had together. And if that is true, that is a promise that Jefferson seems to have followed through on, because he freed almost none of his slaves. But the ones that he several of the ones that he either let run away or he freed in his will, we think were children that he had by Sally Hemings. And so that kind of adds to the idea that maybe there was some kind of negotiated aspect to their relationship, but that I wouldn't want to go any further than that, because we simply don't know. And what we do know is that she was his slave, and therefore this relationship, I think by definition, is coercive.
So we could spend the rest of the time on that, and that's really important. Let's make sure we talk about his religion, because you say a biography of spirit and flesh. And you really do a nice job of trying to understand, again, an aspect of Jefferson that is not simple. There's really nothing, well, not nothing about him. He is, in some ways, you could say, a quintessential 18th century Enlightenment sort of figure. That's who he wants to be, at least. But when you get deep into what makes him tick, it's rarely simple. And so his religious views, again, you said it well earlier, we tend to extreme interpretations, especially with Jefferson. Some have tried to make the case that Jefferson, wow, he really, look at all these things he said about Christianity, and, Christians, we should hold him up as, he really became one of us, and a great heroic founding father Christian. And of course, other people famous, the most obvious example is the Jefferson Bible, cutting out the miracles and the supernatural, and say that this man wanted nothing to do with anything remotely like Christianity. But you make a good case for, I would say, neither of those interpretations, in that as Jefferson, especially later in life, he almost had something like a conversion experience, not as we would understand it as evangelicals, but moving from more skepticism or outright deism. And perhaps there's some political motivation, but I think you're arguing that there was a genuineness to it as well, that he came to see himself as a Christian, as a Unitarian. He believed in God's providence. He believed in the the pure commands of Jesus, and he did not believe in the Trinity or any fine doctrinal formulation. You say probably the worst prediction he ever made in his life is that before long, every young man in the country would be a Unitarian. Well, actually, almost no one is a Unitarian. So he was very wrong about that. We can be thankful. But say a little bit more how you understand his religious commitment, and in particular how it grew and changed and cemented over the last 25 years of his life.
Yeah, I think that as a young man, he does go through a very skeptical phase that could have even veered towards kind of agnosticism or I think atheism is probably too strong,
Mm-hmm.
because you see in the Declaration how deeply theistic he is, in the sense of believing in a created order. And for Jefferson, this isn't, and everybody else in 1776. I mean, this isn't really a decision that you make. I mean, it's obvious in American culture, right, at the time, and there just really aren't atheists in 1776. I mean, you really have to get that word is known, but it kind of means someone who acts as if there isn't a God.
Right.
And atheism as an intellectual proposition is kind of waiting until decades into the 1800s in America. And so he is very skeptical, and I think he even believes that Jesus, while a great moral teacher, was not necessarily even the greatest moral teacher of antiquity. He likes the Epicurean teachers and their ideal of tranquility, and that's part of what he's trying to do at Monticello, I think, is to create an ideal, tranquil haven for himself.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he over time is stung by the charges that he is a heretic, that he's not a Christian. And it's a huge issue in the 1800 presidential campaign about, that people are saying in the Federalist Party who despise Jefferson that he is not fit to be president because he is not a Christian. And so that's known at the time that he has
Mm-hmm.
these heterodox views. And he's stung by that. He's stung by the public revelation of his relationship with Sally Hemmings, which comes out in 1802. So that's widely nationally reported that he has this relationship with Sally Hemmings. And so he's embarrassed, about these kinds of charges and reports in front of his family. He hates the thought that his daughters, might think that he's not a Christian. And so he, at the same time, becomes familiar with some key Unitarian theologians and pastors, and the most important one is Joseph Priestley,
Mm-hmm.
who is from England and then comes to America, and they develop an active, if fairly brief, letter writing relationship where Priestley basically explains to Jefferson what it looks like to be kind of a purely ethical Christian. In other words, it is possible to set aside the kind of supernatural claims about Christianity and things like the Trinity, which, Enlightenment folks, kind of mock and revile as being just nonsense. Mm-hmm. And so Jefferson is really attracted at that moment in his life, strikingly, while he's president, that he had found a version of Christianity that he found intellectually defensible and also ethically attractive. And I think he was genuinely attracted to to the neighborly love ideal in Christianity that he thought was unique in world historical ethical context, and so he accepts Priestley's, and it's not a spiritual conversion, but as you said, but it's an intellectual conversion. That he goes from thinking that Jesus was kind of an important teacher of antiquity, whose writings we have some access to in the Bible, though he thinks lots of the Bible, including the Gospels, is unreliable. And so he latches on to Priestley's version of Jesus's ethics, and he decides, I am a Christian. But he qualifies that by saying, only in an ethical sense, and setting aside the kind of claims about Jesus's divinity in particular, and that's what he sticks with for the rest of his life. And so when he says, "I am a Christian," that's what he means by it.
It's interesting, and I guess I should have known this, but your biography helped me to relearn it again. Many of these controversies surrounding Jefferson, we talk about Sally Hemmings, we talk about his Christianity or lack thereof. These were talked about within his lifetime, often brought up by his opponents. And so you have to take some of those with a grain of salt, but it wasn't as if these things were unknown or untalked about. And they did dog him, especially this charge of being an infidel and being too close to Hume. One of the sadnesses for me as a Presbyterian, and I think I did my doctoral work on Witherspoon, and
Right.
Benjamin Rush intersects with Witherspoon, and Rush is just everywhere. It seems like he just kind of just pops up at everything. Oh, and then there's Benjamin Rush. He's doing something important. So he was instrumental in convincing Witherspoon to come to America to be the president of Princeton. And at that point was, very firmly an evangelical, a friend of the Awakenings. I think if I remember the anecdote correctly, he even married his wife because she considered John Witherspoon the best preacher she had ever heard. And yet by the, later in Rush's life, he has more of a rationalistic Christianity. So he's also influential in helping Jefferson come to terms with this new kind of Christianity that seems palatable for Enlightenment sensibilities. And I, just have to admit that happens, and wish Rush, the younger Rush hadn't morphed into the older Rush. But it leads to a question, especially for you, our expert Baptist theologian, with all of this about Jefferson and his religion. Isn't it the case that Baptists were among his most ardent supporters? And why is that?
That's right. Yeah, the Baptists loved Jefferson, and it was almost all because of religious liberty. And he had fought for religious liberty in Virginia in the 1770s and 80s, and at that time, Virginia still had a formal established church, the Church of England, and it was in Virginia in the late 1760s, early 1770s, when he and Madison were sort of cutting their teeth as young politicians. It was also a season of terrible persecution against the Baptists in Virginia and some other places in America. But that's where I think
were the Presbyterians doing it.
Well, the Presbyterians were sometimes being persecuted themselves in Virginia,
okay.
but and so some of the Presbyterians like Jefferson too for the same reason, but the Baptists were sort of the wildest, evangelical group, and so they came in for the most persecution, and so there were dozens of Baptist preachers put in jail by the early 1770s in Virginia, and so. Jefferson believes that the government needs to get out of the business of having an official church. And he thinks that the government needs to stop persecuting people. I mean, Jefferson probably kind of thinks the Baptists are nuts, but they don't deserve to be persecuted, he thinks, by the government for their, odd beliefs about baptism. And he also knows that if they persecute the Baptists, they'll come after people like him next. And so he just thinks that the persecution needs to stop. The government needs to stop promoting one particular denomination, and just have a kind of free market of religion where the different churches are just allowed to do what they want. And so the Baptists love this, and they latch on to him as their kind of political champion. And this helps to explain why, when Jefferson writes the Wall of Separation letter in 1802, it is addressed to the Danbury Baptist Association of Connecticut, who had written him a kind of really over the top, fawning, celebratory letter about how delighted they are that he's been elected president. And they know that they're not on the same page with him theologically, but they love that he's their champion of religious liberty and is going to bring an end, they hope, to the state establishments of religion. And so that it creates, I think, a sort of wonderful partnership between people who are very different theologically, a partnership in politics, and talking about what's redeemable about Jefferson's legacy. I think religious liberty, especially for me as a Baptist, is right at the top of the list, because he and Madison, I think, are substantially to be credited with forming the ideas and then leading the political charge for full religious liberty in America.
You mean you Baptists didn't just start getting interested in religious liberty like 5 years ago or something?
No, we were interested when we had pastors in jail in the 17th century.
Yeah. No, it's very, very true. And you point out several times in the book, though he wasn't looking to promote evangelical or reformed men into positions, or we'll say more about UVA in a moment. Yet there was a time where he did financially support this one Calvinist, and he had friendly relations with them. So it wasn't as if these sort of evangelical enthusiasts had no part in Jefferson's life or in his intellectual purview, or that he thought they were irredeemably superstitious. So again, I do think that's one commendable part of Jefferson's character and religious record, even though we disagree with him and don't go looking for good theological insight from Jefferson. I want you to just go back to the Danbury Baptist for a moment. If they're making a movie of Jefferson's life and they need just a little bit of comic relief in the middle of all of these hard things going on, it might be the Mammoth cheese episode. Can you talk about how this came to loom literally large in Jefferson's life, this mammoth block of cheese?
Yeah, it really is hilarious. So that weekend that he sent the Wall of Separation letter, it was New Year's Day weekend of 1802, and he had been elected finally after a very difficult election in 1800. He was finally named as president in the spring of 1801. But there had been a lot of charges against him that he was anti-Christian, that he was going to lead a kind of French Revolutionary style campaign against Christianity. And so he was looking for ways to demonstrate that he really is sympathetic to the general interests of religion, which basically meant Christianity at that time in America. And so he was very happy to have the support of evangelical groups when he could get it. And the Baptists were the key constituency nationally, who, not all of them, there were some key Baptist leaders in the North in particular who did not like Jefferson, but groups like the Danbury Baptists loved him. And one New England Baptist and preacher itinerant evangelist was John Leland, who had gotten to be friends with Jefferson in Virginia. But by Jefferson's presidency, he had gone back to New England. And so he got together with these New England Baptists and created this 1,200-pound block of cheese.
That's a lot of
They
cheese.
wanted to give him as a gift, and it was a huge media deal about reporting on the progress of the Mammoth cheese being brought by wagon and ship from New England down to Washington, D.C., and the newspapers are punning on everything Mammoth and cheese. And it's a hoot. And so Leland brings the cheese to Jefferson, and then they publicize the Danbury Baptist letter, and then his response to the Danbury Baptists. And then the Sunday of that weekend, Leland preaches at a meeting before members of Congress in Jefferson. It's kind of embarrassing too. Leland preaches on the gospel text, "Behold, one greater than Solomon is here."
Oh, yeah.
It's a little over the top for my taste, but and the Federalists who are there, who can't stand Jefferson, think the whole thing is just a total embarrassment. But it does show, I think, that yes, Jefferson needs Christians like that politically to help him show that he has Christian supporters, even evangelical supporters, and it also means that Jefferson, in any group that he's part of socially, he's going to be an outlier in terms of his religious beliefs, and so he's constantly having to contend with and partner with and accommodate evangelicals, Reformed Christians who are in his political circles. And so he's just used to that. And it translates into the idea that he also has evangelical and Reformed friends, that some of whom are lifelong friends.
So that segues to, we'll just have, if you can stay a few more minutes, a couple more questions. But why, you say Patrick Henry was the white whale in his life. Moby Dick isn't written yet, but to use that metaphor, he had a particular vituperation for Patrick Henry. Why were those two oil and water?
Yeah, I think it's complicated. I mean, there are a lot of people that Jefferson hates, and I do.
And there were other people that didn't like Patrick Henry.
Yeah, and Henry could be a pretty aggravating figure, but Patrick Henry, as of the beginning of the Revolution, is the most popular politician in Virginia. Now, if Washington was there, he probably would serve that role, but he's gone because of the war, and then his presidency, and so Patrick Henry can get elected as governor of Virginia anytime he wants, and Jefferson is just not that popular, and so I think Jefferson resents that, and it turns out that Henry is opposed politically to just about everything that Madison and Jefferson want to do. And for Henry, I think it is mostly a political issue. For Madison, it's mostly a political issue. But Jefferson takes it very personally. And so it gets so extreme that by the time Jefferson is off in Paris, Madison is reporting to him regularly in letters about, here's the latest awful thing that Patrick Henry has done. And so the height of it is at one point, Jefferson writes to Madison and says, what we need to do, I think, is to begin praying for Patrick Henry's death.
You got religion there.
So, I don't know if Jefferson was joking or not, but they did write it in code. Jefferson and Madison had a secret code that they would use so that people wouldn't find out what they were saying. So they wrote that in code, and that's a pretty extreme thing. But even after Henry died, and into the early 1800s, Jefferson was known to be complaining to visitors in Monticello about how Henry got too much credit for the liberty or death speech and things like that. So it really was borderline obsession for Jefferson.
Wow. So at the end of his life, Jefferson is thinking very much about his legacy and how he will be remembered. And he instructs for his own gravestone, author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia. Famously doesn't mention that, oh, by the way, was president of the United States. And of course, he dies the same day John Adams does, on the 50th anniversary of independence. And how could a Christian population not take that as a sign of some divine favor or divine providence that these two founding fathers live 50 years and die exactly the 50th anniversary on the same day? But before I ask you a wrap up question on Jefferson's life, just go to this last part that he mentions on his gravestone, of course, is the father of the University of Virginia, which was a great passion for his. And you point out that people can misunderstand what Jefferson meant when he said, and he may not have said in these exact terms, but that the university was going to be a secular university. We hear secular, and we take that to mean anti-religious. But Jefferson didn't mean anti-religious. He meant not an established religion. And actually, he had a little bit of arm twisting, you say, but he certainly saw that there would be a place for religion at the table at UVA. And it never was in his mind that I'm making some pantheon to learning that is going to bracket out religion somehow. Because, of course, in the 18th century, virtually no one conceived of an intellectual enterprise that could have even done that if they wanted to. So just talk about what Thomas Jefferson's vision was for the University of Virginia and what you think he accomplished there.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to go again to one extreme or the other with UVA. I mean, it does make a change in the history of American higher education,
right? Where almost everything was, at least in large part, training ministers.
Right, and there would be ministers who trained at UVA, but it was a more natural fit to go to a more denominational college, including Hampton-Sydney or something like that in Virginia. And UVA is one of the first sort of recognizably state universities in the country, in the sense that it's serving more of a kind of general public good rather than just the need for ministers in particular denominations. And it's not going to have a chapel, so that's important. But when you look at the details of what they're studying, it's still a deeply classical Christian education. And so they're studying Latin and Greek and the classics, and they're assumed to be able to read, for instance, the Greek New Testament, which Jefferson did regularly as an adult. This is what you do as an educated gentleman in Virginia in the 18 teens and 20s. And so when you look at what is actually going on at UVA, as you suggested, it would be very difficult. It would be so unfamiliar culturally and educationally at the time to have what we would recognize as a secular education, which is an education where there is no reference to theology or to God or Christian ethics or something like that. And it's just not what Jefferson is trying to do. If you said that he was trying to create a non-denominational college, I think that's much more accurate about what he's doing. Although he even, under some pressure, invited the various Protestant denominations in Virginia to have sort of houses of study and have an official kind of on-campus presence like that. Although none of them took up his offer, I think partly because Presbyterians in particular were just deeply suspicious about what Jefferson was up to at UVA. And so, again, it's a lot of traditional Christians were skeptical about the UVA project, but it is overstated about how secular or especially anti-Christian it was.
So I'll try to give you a good wrap-up question here. We've talked for an hour, and we haven't even talked about the thing for which Jefferson is most famous for most of us, and that is the Declaration of Independence. And there's a whole lot of books on that as well. And, even within Jefferson's lifetime, some were saying, there's too much about rights. And now there's, as you know, Tommy, you probably follow some of the same things I do. There's a very live conversation, and it's not new, but it's, it are the Declaration and the Constitution doing the same sort of thing, or are they really, is the Declaration more this Lockean individualistic rights, and the Constitution is more nationalistic and communitarianism? Or how does Jefferson's Declaration and his view on rights from Locke and Montesquieu and the Scottish Enlightenment, how does that jive with also this strand of civic republicanism? There's all these debates in our day, and they can be traced back 250 years. But my question for you, and you can hit on any of that or none of that, is to ask, okay, we see the inconsistencies, and that's a euphemism. We see the contradictions in Jefferson, and at points in his life, just moral turpitude. And we have to acknowledge that. And yet he's on the Mount Rushmore, literally, and for most Americans, at least occupying some of that conceptual space. If you had to make the case for Jefferson's greatness, not dismissing, but looking square in the face these inconsistencies and instances of moral evil, how would you make the case for Jefferson as a great American and somebody to be celebrated?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would go in the direction. I'm not sure that we would want to celebrate him personally.
Well, right.
But I do think that there is great good that has come out of his legacy. I think that's how I would put it. And one of them is the legacy of religious liberty. And it was not rigid secularism. I mean, you think of John Leland coming and preaching, and the Congress and the president being there in attendance. That it was not an absence of religion, but it was the idea that religion will do best when the government gets out of the business of religion. And that's the genius of the American settlement on religious liberty. And I think that has resulted in great good. And then, most obviously is his idea of equality by our common creation by God has been the most powerful statement of human equality in world history. And been used for great good, not least by figures such as Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King Jr. And so, King in particular was deeply aware of the problematic aspects of Jefferson, and particularly with slavery, and yet he is able to appropriate the legacy because of the power of Jefferson's ideas and the beauty of the way that he articulated this ideal of human equality by our common creation by God. And he says that that's America's creed. And so, I think that in a way, I mean, we say that we celebrate Martin Luther King's legacy, but I think he actually sets an example that would be something of a corrective to our culture of being able to appreciate and even admire great things about Jefferson's intellectual and political legacy, while certainly not endorsing a lot of things about the way that Jefferson lived. It seems to me that somewhere in there is the right kind of wise, sober, moderate, which is so hard to be moderate in American culture today, but the sensible historical view that, not, just kind of canceling everybody who did things wrong, but sitting with the contradiction, sitting with the deep problems with somebody like Jefferson, which I do think are more extreme than average, but also appreciating that the legacy of Jefferson has been used for great good in American and world history, and just being able to sit with those kind of tensions and contradictions I think is a more mature, healthy approach to history than a lot of what we do in our kind of iconoclastic age.
Yeah, that's a great summary. So I'll let you have the last word. Tommy, thanks for coming on. Again, Thomas Jefferson, A Biography of Spirit and Flesh. I encourage people to go out and get it. Just came out recently. And then, follow your links on whatever site you're on, listeners, to the other good things that Tommy's written, other good biographies and other good in his newsletter as well. So thank you and blessings on the move, and hope you enjoy your 4th of July and blowing something up in honor of our country's birthday this weekend.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yep, good to be with you. And to all of our listeners, I hope to see you. I guess I won't see you, but hope you can be back and join with me and our guests probably at the end of the summer. And until then, glorify God, enjoy Him forever, and read a good book.